So I want to say welcome. Thank you to those who are joining us this evening. I have just a few slides that I start out with one or two for every meeting, just in case there are new people joining us for the first time. And this is our town hall for middle school. So welcome our middle school principals who are joining us tonight. Thank you for being here. Go ahead, Sasha, for the next slide. So this is our actual district task force, and it just shows you how the planning grid has worked. We have an overall planning team, which is right in the middle, that district task force. We have a doctor who consults for us, our head of nursing, Mary Keller. We also have all of our cabinet members and a member of the Board of Education, Karen Hirsch. We get inputs from all of those white boxes around the outer edges because every one of those components, from special education to transportation, health advisement, must all go into the planning as we try to get our doors open for September. So we've had several task force meetings, and they are available on our website. If you go to Greenwich Public Schools website, right on the main page, there's a link to the reopening documents. There's a lot of information on the page. We've been very busy this summer. All of these meetings are recorded. If you're joining us and you're kind of just joining us now and you haven't been watching all summer, I would encourage you just to look at the more current information, because it has changed a lot through the summer. As you know, the governor has made adjustments, as the State Department of Education has also made adjustments. We do have this meeting in the middle, and then the high school tonight will follow this meeting. We have a town hall session for special education, which will happen on Wednesday evening. We also have a Board of Education meeting on Thursday evening, where we will be talking about reopening. And in addition to that, I want to mention that tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, the League of Women Voters are partnering with PTAC for a conversation about reopening with the superintendent, and that starts at 5 o'clock. These are many of the focus groups that we have met with to get input, and everything from our special education focus group, which is a large group that meets, they've been meeting weekly. Our elementary teacher focus group, we've met with secondary teachers, specialist teachers, PTA, again, staff town halls, community town hall, and we have a large Q&A document, questions and answers. It's about 500 questions that were submitted, that is available. And we're working hard to make sure, if those answers have changed slightly due to any changes at the state, that we're going in and updating those as well. So we have, again, a meeting on Thursday night, which will be a virtual meeting. You're more than welcome to join us. We will talk about reopening with the full Board of Education. And I'm going to address just one piece, because this is a frequently asked question. And while I'm doing this, I just want to encourage anybody who's on and watching, you can click on the Q&A on your screen and start submitting questions. And once I go through these next 2 or 3 slides, we actually will spend the hour just taking questions from you and trying to answer as many questions as we can. So one of the questions that is very popular right now is, how do we make a decision on in-person learning or moving to hybrid, which is what we call the moderate level, which is the orange, or a high level, which favors to moving to full remote learning. And this was based on work from the Harvard Global Health Institute publication, and the Connecticut State Department of Health has put this chart together to help schools guide our way on whether we should be open or closed. And it's based on the number of new COVID cases on a 7-day rolling average per 100,000. So you'll see where the low range is, that's 10 new cases per 100,000, 10 to 25 is moderate, and 25 plus new cases starts to favor going to remote. This is just a general, the statistics. Go ahead and go to the next one, and showing risk level. This actually shows us where we are in Fairfield County. So from the state level, they look at it by the county level. And when you look at, for us, we are at 2.6 per 100,000 for a 1.4% test positivity. It is a very low rate. And I do want to assure those that are watching, in Greenwich, the head of nursing, Mary Keller, is terrific, and she sends me information specifically on Greenwich, because we do border New York, and we're right at the bottom of Fairfield County and southern Fairfield County. We want to make sure that a trend's not starting here that perhaps isn't happening in other parts of Fairfield County, which is the way it was last March. It took several weeks before it moved up basically 95. So we do watch locally, but again, this is how it's measured at the state level to help guide us in our decision making. And we will move now to start taking questions. And again, there is that live Q&A function. And I have several panelists on with us tonight. So we'll let people answer questions according to who the best person is. And I think Dr. Carabillo and Mr. D'Amico, if you want to do it the same way we did it last time, that was probably good. People probably get tired of hearing my voice because my Q&A, it wasn't working on the computer. So if we want to rotate, that's probably a good thing. Okay. Will we have any orientation or Zoom with our remote teacher before school starts? And my thought to that would be, you know, absolutely, you're going to have whatever the middle school is doing for greeting students, we will make sure that our remote students have that same opportunity. And I don't know, middle school principals, do you want to speak to that? I know you have a 6th grade orientation, I believe.
Yeah, Tony, we start the day before. I think it's September 8th is the 6th grade orientation. It goes from 8 to 12:45. We'll run the kids through every class that they would possibly have. The next day, the whole school kind of joins in. We don't generally do it before that school orientation. That usually is when they get to meet their teachers for the first time.
Gotcha.
How is PE being offered when the weather prevents outdoor instruction? Will cohorts be mixed? Will equipment be used? Will social distancing be in place? Who will determine the curriculum, as the existing curriculum will not be able to be delivered safely?
I can do that one if you guys want me to.
I can do it as well, either way.
Go ahead, Jason. It's all yours.
So our buildings, most of our buildings have gyms that can be divided into 2 gym spaces. So those are going to be used as individual sort of classrooms so that the cohorts won't necessarily mix on a given day. So depending on the individual logistics of a building, you may have a cohort using one gym and a different cohort using another gym. The students are going to be rotating on a 45 to 60 day period of time through an elective. So for example, a particular cohort of students would have PE for that 45 or 60 days. After that, a different cohort would have PE for 45 or 60 days to minimize or eliminate that cross cohorting. In cases where there may be additional spaces needed, obviously the individual building has looked for additional spaces where PE activities can be administered or rolled out.
And just to answer some of those other questions, they're not sharing equipment. They actually pre-ordered some additional equipment. They're focusing on things like soccer that don't have a lot of hand touch. And we thought we may also implement fencing, because if you get too close, you just stab somebody if they're 6 feet away. So I thought it was a good COVID activity for our kids. We're not really doing fencing.
No, Mr. Weinstein.
The other, and they will not be, as Mr. Weinstein said, they do not share any of the equipment. They will make sure that any equipment that was used with that cohort is cleaned before the next class comes in. Okay, here's one for you, one of you principals. If lockers won't be used, will book bags stay at the kids' desks or in the hallway? Do phones stay in their bags in hallway? And can you explain how to bring in school supplies?
I guess that's my turn. So I think it'll be similar across the schools. The book bags are going to stay with the students in their classroom. We're not going to leave them unattended in the hallways. Cell phones will be off in bags as they were before, off in lockers. And school supplies, typically how we've done it before, those first few days of school for an orientation each grade level, teachers go over what the expectations are for keeping your materials organized, when they're going to need them, how they're going to be used, so students can bring them in their bags. Some kids come with them their first day. Some students wait for the first day to get a sense, and the teachers kind of walk them through that. So it's usually a few days of rolling orientation related to how students remain organized, how they have their supplies, when they need them, and what the teachers expect. And they do that class by class. So that will all be coming as students are oriented in the first few days.
Can you please walk us through a daily schedule for remote learning? Will students have dedicated remote teachers?
So I'm going to answer the first part of that, and then I'll let the principals talk about the schedule, which I think you shared last week. Really, a really good video was recorded about their scheduling. So in middle school, it will be a blended approach in that we have to see how many teachers we have available to actually teach remote. And it is likely that we could have students, we have enough students to be connected with a teacher who's teaching remote, for instance, for mathematics. Then we may also have a teacher, we may not have somebody who can teach remote for a specific 8th grade class, and they follow their same schedule. So the actual webcam streaming is what you would expect. They're live with their teachers so that if they come back into the school environment, they can jump right back into their schedule. They're not having to start with all new teachers. It would only be in a specific situation where they would have to change teachers. And again, that's because as we get in secondary, it gets a little bit more complex because secondary teachers are very content specific. And one of the most important things is that you have a teacher in front of your child who knows the content, not just a teacher. Where in K-5, they teach all of the content. It's very normal and it's much more fluid. So do you want to speak to the schedule, one of you, kind of what your schedule looks like?
I think the schedule is going to mirror what they've had in the past, which is, depending on the building, either a 6 or 7 period day. They're going to go through each of their classes, somewhat modified time. We have to allow more time for passing this year and such, as we have to stagger the passing time. But it's going to be a very typical, you know, if math is at 9 o'clock, math is at 9 o'clock, and you'll be expected to be out at that time.
So one of the questions, will there be any more change following the request of the teachers union to delay school start in Connecticut? And I have not heard a great deal about them pushing to delay start time, you know, in Connecticut. We pushed our start back intentionally, and that was really to add more teacher days for professional development, because we do have some new equipment that our teachers are going to need to learn to utilize. And so that was really a district decision. And the health and medical professionals have all said they really want us to get our doors open right now. It would be it's much more difficult the farther we go into the fall and we get closer to flu season. We're more likely to have an issue where we could end up having to go full remote just because flu season's starting and it's difficult to tell whether it's COVID or flu. So we're intending to start. Our orientation is on the 8th, starting first day of school, September the 9th.
So we have a question and a comment. Very nice comment. Thank you for all the hard work you're doing for our Greenwich community during this uncertain and ever-changing time. What would mask breaks and lunch hours look like? Would they be at least 6 feet apart? Would the students be asked to refrain from speaking during lunch to minimize the spread? So I can tell you that yes, they will be 6 feet apart during lunch. And I will let Tom, Jason, or Gordon follow up with the rest of it.
I think it's my turn. So in terms of the mask breaks, I think it's a scenario where it really depends on the ability to be outside. Obviously, if there are natural opportunities for students to be outside during PE, or weather permitting, if a teacher chooses to take their class outside, greater opportunity to have social distancing, greater distance perhaps even than the 6 feet, good opportunity for a mask break. I think when we're inside, we're going to look for creative opportunities where we could be potentially inside and have greater distance. And I think that'll change depending on the time of day, and that will change depending on the sort of logistics of each building. But to be quite honest, we're also still working that out. It's not completely ironed out as to what all those pieces look like. So that's part of the work in progress that we're working on now.
So we have a question as follows. Communities in Fairfield County choosing to start hybrid or online, and there's a list of over a dozen here. Why are these districts being more cautious than Greenwich?
So when people are choosing to go hybrid or not go hybrid, it's for a variety of reasons. And I go back to that health chart, you know, that I showed before. All of us in Fairfield County have the same health and medical data that says it's safe to return. Where some districts are really struggling is that they either don't have the classroom space because they don't have the square footage. And I reached out to my colleagues just even over the weekend, because we do meet every Friday, all the superintendents in Fairfield County, and especially during COVID. Usually we're once a month. The last several months we've met every Friday, and sometimes more than just Friday. Some of them are really challenged with their class sizes. So if they're a community where the average class size is running 26 to 30, they have a greater challenge trying to bring all of their students back. And some of them were only able to get 1 foot, 1.5 foot distance between the students. So they felt like that wasn't safe. And they would have announced hybrid probably much sooner, but the state, as you know, many of you watching, even when we announced it for our high school, it still wasn't allowed. So that was a change that was made over the last 3 weeks to give us more flexibility. We do believe in our classrooms that we can meet the 3 to 6 feet. We do believe that our middle school principals have done a phenomenal job of putting their cohorts. I can't even begin to tell you how many hours have gone into this. And I know they could probably tell you, but many to get these cohorts and these teams. And not only the cohorts and how they've adjusted, how their electives will be handled. So there's little movement of crossing in the hall, how they've staggered their passing times so that the halls aren't as crowded. And one thing that really resonated with me, I think it was last week, Mr. Goldstein, you actually made a comment. We always look for the silver lining sometimes in our challenges. And you said that perhaps the way that you're actually moving students through the hall is a way for the future to think about in your building, because you've been challenged the last couple of years of having so many students in the hall at one time, and that your new schedule is actually minimizing that. It's actually helping with that. So in Fairfield County, when we look at hybrid, there are a multitude of reasons. And again, if we can cohort and we can social distance and we can do those other things, all of the guidance says we should be open. Now, I will say in Darien, they're starting the first 3 weeks hybrid just to have a slower opening, and then they're going full remote. They're going full open 3 weeks in. So some districts are approaching just the opening differently. I really feel like if we can't do it now, with the rate that we have, all the planning that we've put forward, that 3 weeks from now is not going to make any difference. And I do, again, in middle school, feel very confident with the work that principals have done. And we also, a lot of people don't understand that when you're worried about the size of students in your building, some of the questions I've had, our class sizes are huge. Well, we set our target really at the beginning of the year for the vast majority of classes at middle school to be at 20. And we've done a really pretty good job of getting that done. Then on top of that, you also have students that are opting for remote. And by Wednesday, when it closes at midnight, again, we'll have even a better idea. But you're going to have students who are not even in your usual population, as well as we've worked to get the class sizes down. So we've done a lot of work to be at this point and to feel confident about a reentry for K-8. Thanks, Mark.
The next question is, will lunch service be available in the cafeteria? Lunch will be available in the cafeteria, but we will be starting off with just brown bag lunches, but there will be a gluten-free option and an allergy-free option, and students will be able to grab and go with their lunches in the cafeteria. If your child is not eating in the cafeteria that day because that class happens to be going outside, then they would just grab and then go outside with their teachers or wherever they're going to eat.
Next question, what are the results of the parent survey that we completed? How many opted for in-person and how many chose remote? Breakdown by school, please.
Yeah, that will be open. We'll have that with the Board of Education on Thursday night. Because of the storm, we had a lot of input from families that they were without power for a lot of last week when we were closing the survey. So we've opened that back up. I was in last Friday's note that they have until Wednesday. So Wednesday night at midnight it will close. Thursday morning we'll go in and look at all those calculations, and we'll be prepared to report on that at the Board of Education meeting on Thursday.
Next question is, my daughter will continue cello as a new 6th grader. Will this still be offered? At the beginning of school, we are not offering any instrumental music at the middle school or at the elementary school, as we really have to focus on our cohorts, and we need to use our instrumental teachers as general music teachers for the middle school. So that will not happen at the beginning of the year, but as we move forward, if things settle down, we'll have to revisit it.
I might just answer, there's a question about the first part I think I just addressed, because it was how many people are going to be returning to the building, and that's what we'll have on you for Thursday. But it also talks about what does Plan B look like and how long will it take to implement, which would mean if we went hybrid or we went full remote. So the principals were asked as part of their summer work over these last few weeks to make sure that their class lists are already split, that to match the high school hybrid, and our elementary principals have done the same, so that if we should start seeing spikes and we should need to go to hybrid, families will know exactly whether they're in Group A or Group B, and whether they're Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. And we've done that across the district so that we could change in 24 hours and be ready to go without losing a week of school, because we're having to go in and look at that. Going full remote, everybody would go home. More than likely, we would give our teachers a day to get settled, because you're moving equipment from school to home. That was one thing that was incredibly challenging last spring. We ended up having to get some teachers, back in buildings to take desktops home, because they just couldn't provide what they needed, but they need to have time to get their materials. It happened so quickly for us last spring. We learned from that. So it could take a day, but we're ready to go for all three: in person, hybrid, and remote, if we should need to do so.
We've opted to start the year remote. Will my student be assigned teachers at our local school with lessons live streamed? I am wondering whether if we move to in-person later in the year, will my students' classes and teachers be consistent or be all new?
That's the great thing about the way it can work in secondary, because you need content specific teachers. So if the student is in a class list right now at middle school, they can stream in with that content teacher every day. And if maybe the family changes their mind 2 months into school and they're starting to feel more comfortable, they can hop right back in that schedule face to face and not have to change teachers. There may be a few circumstances where we just need an additional math teacher or we need an additional specialty teacher, because we do have some staff members who are going to be remote due to health or medical related issues. Some of those math teachers, obviously they're not sitting at the middle school, but for the most part, it should be a seamless transition if students decided to come back.
Next question, is there a plan for testing the kid? If not, why wouldn't we do that? Well, we do not test children. That is up to their individual health providers to determine whether there would be a test or not. Will the middle school be offering after-school programs? At the current time, we will not be offering any after-school programs for the middle school students.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Mark.
Given that lunch is the highest risk time of the day with no masks and talking happening, will students be allowed to speak in their normal loud lunch voice, or will they be encouraged to not talk as loudly so as to not spend droplets, or will lunch be silent?
I could jump on that one. Lunch will not be silent, but I will tell you this: the cafeterias will be less than half full, so the need to speak loudly to have your friends hear you does not exist anymore. They're going to talk to each other, but they're going to be 6 feet apart or more. We've all measured our cafeterias as such, and we're going to get them outside as quickly as we can.
Okay, question for Jason, I think you're next, or Tom. I understand there may be staggered bell times for cohorts or grade levels. How will these staggered bell times work for the middle school?
So basically, we are looking at, at least in my school, there are 2 cohorts on each grade level. So there are, in essence, 6 different bell times. We will not be using bells because bells would be going off all day long if we did it that way. So teachers will be, monitoring the time on their own and being strict in terms of when they are dismissing students from each of their classes. The way that we are each doing it is really dependent upon how our current bell schedules worked and what we did to build off of that, so as to limit the impact on instructional time. So the period lengths, I think, as Gordon mentioned before, should be very close to what they were before. We're thinking creatively in terms of sort of how we use, let's say, our advisor-based time and staggering the length of those by grade level, swapping cohorts so that they each have the equal amount of time each marking period or semester. But basically, we're manipulating the time that we have within the day in order to make sure that the students still have their lunchtime and instructional time almost as exact or as close to possible throughout the day, while still making sure that groups are not passing through the hallways at the same time. Going on, I'm not sure what day I'm on right now and what version of my bell schedule. I can tell you it's a time-consuming task, no pun intended, but it is something that we know will work out. It's just a matter of tweaking the minutes to get the right fit for each grade level and cohort.
Can remote students ask questions live? Are they going to be paired with in-class students in breakout rooms?
They can ask questions live, and how the teacher uses the breakout rooms will depend on the teacher and how they organize that. Every teacher is a little bit different in how they utilize breakout rooms, and some of them may not use breakout rooms at all. But I think it's a newer feature that a lot of teachers are really enjoying. So I think you'll see it grow throughout the year. One of the questions on here that I think is a great question too, will Western fields be completed for school to utilize for outdoor activities? And I do think it's important to note there is space outside. It's not like they don't have any space at all, but that we're making great progress on the field. But right now it is in the voluntary remediation plan. We're working with DEEP at the state level. We've had a couple of meetings, just had one about a week and a half ago. So we're making progress, but first the plan must be approved by DEEP, and then there's a tremendous amount of soil that will need to be removed, and because it's contaminated soil, that is work that would start likely next summer. Now, if something happened at the end of the year and we were in a situation like we were last year and we knew that April, May, and June, we were not going to be in school, perhaps that's a timeline that DEEP, if we got the approval, could move up, but it will not be in place for this school year.
Just to reiterate, Tony, there's ample space. We've had gym classes on the part of the field that's open, and the whole lower field has been open the whole time.
Right. Great. Thank you, Gordon. And there's a question about, thank you very much for all your time and hard work to pull this together. So thank you, Lucy. I'd like to know what the plan is for busing. How do you plan to deal with the children from different cohorts that ride the bus? So one of the pieces that we will be requesting from parents is busing absolutely essential for your child, or can you drive your child to school? And if you are a family that can drive your child, that's what we're going to ask you to do, because we're very concerned about cohorting on the buses, social distancing, given the number of students who generally ride our buses. But we're going to do the very best that we can to spread students out on the bus. And again, we're going to encourage parents to drive their cars. But another thing about cohorting, I just want to mention, is that, you know, the school is not the safe haven for cohorting, and we don't want to necessarily give ourselves that false sense, because children are part of numerous cohorts. What we're trying to do is mitigate as much as possible within the school environment, because we have them for a large portion of the day. But our students go to athletic cohorts that are, you know, private baseball, they go to church cohorts, they go to Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, all types of groups in and around, just as part of their life, you know, every day. But again, our cohorts are to minimize that they'll have contact with large groups of students when they're inside our schools. So we're going to do the same thing on the buses, and there may be some students on the buses who are in different cohorts, and that's why we're trying to make sure our buses can socially distance.
Another question. Let's go back to ALP for a second. I am not sure I understand how ALP will work for middle schoolers. Can you explain how ALP will work for students in ALP English and leveled math for all students?
I think I can speak for the three of us. We've been able to keep our levels pretty much as they were. Remember, cohorting not by a group of 20, but by a group of 100. So we have some flexibility in how we can move kids around. So I know, speaking for myself, we were able to keep people's places more or less as they were assigned coming in.
Thank you, Gordon. Jason, Tom, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, what Gordon said, the ALP and the math, the ALP English and the math were the early filters in terms of trying to get students into their schedules. And, you know, we've been able to pretty much make that work. So it's really no different than it normally would be.
Next question, will remote students be included in the class size count? We actually have two different lists that we keep as a district right now. And part of that is all of our students must be counted at the state level. So inside our system, we have a list that has every student enrolled, they're in their class, but we also know the class count when you take the remote students out of those environments and what the classrooms actually look like. So we're keeping up with both of those. The next question I'll just read off quickly is, what type of mask does the district recommend for teachers and students? And is there a type that will not be considered acceptable? Our Board of Education is actually working on a policy right now. They will have a second reading this Thursday evening. And in that policy, it does define what types of masks are okay and are acceptable. For instance, a bandana would not be acceptable. A student wearing, you know, a mask left over from Halloween would not be acceptable. Gaiters are also listed as not being acceptable, given all of the research that has come out just about gaiters. And it goes as far as to say the cloth mask, if you're looking at the paper type medical masks, 2-ply and 3-ply. So there's a lot of information in there, and we'll be pushing more of that out to our families once that policy is actually approved. The state had said they were going to bring guidance last week or this week, so we're still waiting on that from the state, just in case theirs is a little bit different than what's in our policy. But we will definitely be putting more information out, making sure people have the safest mask as possible. We also do encourage that students right now are wearing masks, that you have your young person, you know, practicing. And we also, if you have a young person who really struggles wearing a mask, I speak from experience, at least for me, that different masks feel different. And a mask that's really thick cotton versus one of the lighter medical ones can make all the difference in the world for a mask feeling comfortable. So again, we'll be putting more information out about that. I'm going to take the next one too, because it feeds right in. Will kids wear masks in PE? So I actually had a PE teacher, you know, who reached out about a week or so ago and was concerned about this question, because basically, if they take students outside, does that mean they don't have a mask on the whole time? And that's not necessarily the case. Mask breaks are intended to really not be past about 15 minutes. They need to be socially distanced. When you look at what PE, part of that is, what are they doing in PE? So if you have students outside and they're stretching and doing yoga and they're all, you know, socially distanced, they may have their mask off for 15 minutes. But it will be a blend for the PE teachers, because again, they do see lots of different students, and they will balance that out with their programming.
Ann, do you have a question? Where do you want me to go?
You can go. I'm looking at a different question and trying to make sense of it.
Okay. When will you advise how the buses will work? I indicated we'd be willing to give up our bus spot and my son will walk or be driven. Will this be confirmed officially that he will be removed from the bus list?
Yes, we will be asking families to actually officially let us know in the coming week. That is something, once we know how many students are actually remote as well, it's kind of a series of steps that we keep taking. And then you will actually let us know that you're willing to drive your student. What we can't have is a parent who says, well, I might just want to put them on whenever I want to put them on, because after the first week of school and we've counted on social distancing, for safety for everybody, if all of a sudden 40 students show up at the bus with the mask on, we have to let them on because we can't just drive off and leave students standing there. So if a parent opts to drive their student, they just need to understand they're helping, you know, our community get our schools open and making a commitment to have them walk, you know, or being dropped off. But yes, you will be having confirmation. We will be asking you for that in the next week or so.
If a student or teacher in the school tests positive, will a health notice go out to all parents of the school and not just the cohort group?
Not necessarily. It really depends on what's happening in the building. And for privacy reasons, it's very similar to when you think about how it operates during flu season. It definitely would go out to a cohort if they think a cohort has been exposed. But if a student, let's say it happened over winter break and then they came back on the Monday, they had it the week prior, they may not notify. But again, that comes back to the nurses, and it will depend on what they think the health department, because they do all the contact tracing, will help us with that and let us know when we do need to notify.
Okay, there's a clarification question here. Clarification re remote learning for middle schoolers. Will they be streaming into their local classroom teachers in their assigned cohort, or will they have separate remote only teachers?
It's a little bit of both. And that's kind of how we answered that before. They're in their class roster. They can be web streaming, but we may have a situation where we have so many students who are remote and we have a math teacher who's now remote, that we're connecting those students with that teacher for that one subject. But again, until we get through Wednesday, and we really know how many of our students are remote, how many of our teachers are remote, then that's going to actually help us with that. But web streaming, staying connected to their course schedule as close as possible is ideal for middle school.
Tony, do you want to touch upon the HVAC and MERV filter type questions that you've received in the past? I'm scrolling through and seeing a number of those.
Sure. So around the district, depending on the age of the building, all of the HVAC systems are different. And one of the things a question that we get is the rating of our filters. And we in Greenwich, our systems generally are MERV 9 and 10. What some people have seen printed is that a MERV 13 to 16 would be ideal. However, MERV 16 is what you would see, for instance, in a hospital. So there's probably not a public school, well, I'm not going to say any, but very few public schools have the air quality, you know, of a hospital, especially like in an operating sort of area. So our filters are 9 and 10. We are really making sure that we're checking all of our windows. If we had windows that, you know, didn't open and now they can open, we're trying to make sure that's happening. We had that just this week at our high school where we had several windows that had been screwed shut. They're taking those screws out so that windows will be able to open. But we do have some buildings that still have window units versus the newer buildings that have HVAC that bring in outdoor air. So we're having to evaluate building by building to really make sure each building is ready to go.
So this question is for one of the principals. When will students be able to get extra help from their teachers? As more parents will be driving, is this possible to do after school when needed? We know it can't be done after school because we're not starting out with any after school activities, but perhaps one of you would like to answer that question. Tom?
Yeah, I can jump in, and Gordon and Jason, feel free to add when I'm done. But basically, the way we're looking at it now with teachers is, first and foremost, we want to get the school year up and running safely, and we want to make sure that all students are clear on what the expectations are for entering the building, getting settled for the day, moving throughout the building in a safe manner. You know, that there's going to be a lot of orientation, as I mentioned earlier, in the first few days. However, we are looking at our schedule and knowing that kids and our students aren't going to be congregating or allowed to congregate sort of in different areas before school. They are going to need to attend to one of their cohort classrooms prior to first period, whenever it is that they arrive. So each cohort of teams, as we've used in the past, the middle school really leveraging that interdisciplinary team model, the teachers and the cohorts will really be talking at their meetings to see how they can structure that before school time to support students with any extra help needs as they emerge and as we become more consistent and comfortable with our routines. After school time is going to be tough again, because we're not going to have late buses and having students congregate after school as well. So as of right now, knowing that there's going to be students coming in early, potentially earlier than they were in the past, and they couldn't go anywhere but to the classrooms, how do we leverage the time that we have with them in front of us to get that extra help? That being said, I think we also have to see how the year unfolds and what our numbers are and where we are and how we may begin to use after school time if that's appropriate. I don't know, Jason and Gordon.
Just one other piece. A lot of times the advisor-based time that's built into our daily schedule, at times that's capitalized on too for some extra help depending on student needs. And within the cohort, again, the team of teachers will be communicating, and it's possible that students can see the teacher within that cohort that they need during that advisor-based time.
So
great job. I trained you well.
So from an Eastern Middle School 8th grader, how will art, consumer science, PE, tech, etc. work remotely?
Well, as Dr. Jones had said, if the students that are remote are still linked in their normal class lists and they are streaming into those classes, that would be just like any other class. Obviously, if there is a scenario where there are enough students on remote and teachers that line up within that subject area or that elective area, that may be a scenario where they may be doing remote with that remote teacher. But they will still follow, if they're streaming in, they'll follow that cohort rotation for that 45 or that 60 days. So this way, if there's a change and they end up returning off the remote schedule to in-person, it would be as seamless a transition as possible.
Thank you, Jason.
Jason, somebody wants to know, CMS mentioned they have 2 cohorts per grade level. How many cohorts do you have at Eastern per grade level?
Eastern has 3 cohorts per grade level, just for the sheer numbers to keep the cohorts at 100 or less. So there's a total of 9 cohorts in the building, 3 for each grade level.
And I do think I know I've answered some questions just to Eastern parents. Eastern is a building that was built to hold more students. And so I just think that's important to note. The buildings are different sizes, and that was the way they were intended when they were built. So Western and actually Eastern are both like right at closer to the top of capacity if all students are in the building, which they won't be in September because we do have students who are remote learning or homeschooling.
And just to add to that piece, I think regardless of whether it's Eastern, Central, or Western, I think the decision as to how many cohorts, as well as how many class groupings within each cohort, was done to try to keep the numbers at 20 or less, or as close to that per class size. So that's one of the reasons why, for example, 3 cohorts per grade level at Eastern, where maybe, a different building has 2 cohorts, but the overarching goal is the same. And I think the result in that regard is the same. It, obviously factors into how many lunch waves and those kinds of things, 9 cohorts versus 6, but that's the individual work.
What happens if a parent does not want his or her child to be seen on a screen in a class being streamed?
If they are actually in the classroom live, they would want to make sure that the teacher knows. For the most part, when you're web streaming, the camera is actually on the teacher teaching, because you need to be able to see where they're writing, see their PowerPoint. If it is a teacher who's sitting in the class and that's physically present, and the teacher, turns a webcam around, that's very different. Where it would be, going onto the class, and you'd have to let the teacher know.
Let's see. If my child is slotted for a geometry class as an 8th grader, and then there is no remote teacher available for this subject, Could he be placed in a live stream of a GHS class? Could a possible solution be an in-school geometry teacher teaching so many periods live with the school children and then one period strictly for remote school children?
I mean, if your child is in a geometry class at middle school, then he will still be in the geometry. He or she will still be in the geometry class at middle school. You know, unless there's enough, as Dr. Jones said, unless enough kids who take geometry who opted out, we can make that work. But right now they'll be on a roster, and if they're in the class, they'll be able to follow that class.
Thanks, Gordon.
Can you talk about, and I know the information, you know, will continue to be pushed out to parents, but in addition to kind of staggering your, when they're arriving, how are you using your entrances and exits different this fall for each one of your schools in comparison to what you did last year?
So, I mean, I could speak to Eastern, and I think it's similar for most of the other buildings as well, where we looked at where students typically are. So for example, at Eastern, certain parts of the building are typically where the 8th grade classes are, and different parts of the building are where the 6th grade classes typically are, and likewise 7th grade. So normally students either enter the front door at the front of the building, or they enter by the bus loop if they're arriving on the bus. Whereas this year, there'll be entrances and exits at the beginning and the end of the day, close to where those grade level cohorts are. So for example, the door at the end by the building by the 8th graders, that's where 8th grade cohorts will enter and exit. Where the 6th grade classes are, that's where they will enter and exit. I believe, you know, both Central and Western have done the same thing, where those cohorts will have entrances and exits that are near where their classes are to minimize any cross cohort of students.
Yeah, that's spot on, Jason. Also, because we're opening the doors at 7:20 now, it should be naturally staggered as they come in. There's a 40-minute window, but even a 50-minute window, if you will, where they can come into the buildings. Therefore, there shouldn't be the congregating and the staggering that used to happen. Plus, we're also staggering our dismissal times. We're talking about doing the buses at a certain time and then walkers at a certain time. And they're still going in and out through the same doors that they enter through. So it should be, again, hopefully, it should go pretty smoothly.
And then just in addition to that, we're looking at how we use some of our other support staff to man doors, be in the hallways, make sure they're ushering students to where they need to go so there isn't that congregation. So, you know, students should be entering and exiting near where the majority of their classes are, and there will be adult supervision throughout that process.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question? I think this is a good one. If a student tests positive but chooses not to tell the school and is asymptomatic carrier, will the school ever be notified? So when a student is tested, again, that information all goes to the local Department of Health. We have an obligation of reporting from the local Department of Health to the State Department of Health. That were those numbers that I was showing you back at the very beginning. The health department actually would start that contact tracing. And yes, they would let the school know if they feel like our school has a positive case and it, you know, could have exposed other people within the school. I think part of the challenge that they experienced this summer, and I'm not going to say on a huge level, because I do want to say this summer, if you read the news, there was a party where some students tested positive, but there were a lot of summer camps that happened with Park and Rec this summer, and they went off beautifully. We also had a lot of training, athletic training this summer where they were in cohorts of 10. And for the most part, we had one case. We knew about that cohort of 10 then quarantined, but all of the other workout groups actually went along very well. And the health department is fantastic to let us know if they think that there's any sort of situation where we could have a positive case. And they do feel as though they have plenty of people for the contact tracing. I was on the emergency call just last week, and that question was asked. So we feel like we're in great hands. And again, they really do watch out for our students and our staff.
I have a question here from a 7th grader at Eastern taking geometry. They're starting out remote, but if I attend in person, will this mess up my cohorting? Jason?
It won't mess up the cohorting. So what we did was we built the class schedules initially, assuming all students were in before we had any knowledge of who might have opted for remote. And for the vast majority of those cases, we will leave those schedules as is. In looking at the distribution of those who have so far chosen remote, it's a pretty even distribution across class sections and cohorts and grade levels, so it doesn't throw them off enough. So it would make more sense in terms of what's best for the student is to enable that transition back in their normal schedule without disrupting it or having to change everything. So unless something is really out of balance, we'll do everything we can to sort of leave those class lists as they were.
Is there a plan to have a quarantine time around major holidays such as Thanksgiving? Some colleges are opting to have students continue distance learning from Thanksgiving to January 2021. Has this option been considered?
As we get into the school year, quite frankly, we evaluate every day, every week. It's working with our local Department of Health. You know, our spike for the flu last year actually came just before February. It wasn't in November, December. It really spiked. And we were very thankful that we actually had a break in February. Otherwise, we were spiking. So we watch every month. And again, we work with our local Department of Health. And if they tell us that that the flu is spiking in the region and maybe it would be a good thing to go full remote for a week, we'll work with them on that and be willing to adjust and change as needed.
How many more custodians by school will be in place to clean the building during the school day? Since Eastern has more people, it makes sense that more resources should be provided.
So in our larger buildings, there are more people. And that's, you know, part of across the district, not just even in middle school. However, we did post for 13 temporary positions across the district. We're still trying to fill some of those, but we are adding extra custodial staff just to help primarily with this issue. It's also the reason why we want the community to understand that in the evenings, why we're not doing our after school activities to start the year, because we really need to be focused on the cleaning. It's also why we're not renting our buildings, which will be frustrating for some groups, but we're starting the year trying to make sure our custodians can stay really focused on doorknobs and restrooms and really making sure they're deep cleaning, you know, really disinfecting every single night and throughout the day. But again, those 13 are going to be put out into our buildings according to where our facilities feels there's the greatest need on any particular day.
Tony, I think you answered this at the elementary session, but I think it's worth repeating at the middle school. Will you be notifying parents if there are students with mask exemptions in our child's class or cohort?
So the State Department of Health has really come out a little stronger in the last week or so, and we're actually hoping maybe they will put a very strong statement out in this next week for guidance. If we have a student who, from their perspective, for a medical reason, cannot wear a mask to school, they have said those children should not be in school. If their medical issue is such, again, that they shouldn't be able to wear a mask, that they really should not be in school, because it's the greatest layer of protection along with cohorting and social distancing that we have. We expect to have some students who may have a special unique need, and we're going to need to look at different types of masks, different types of shields, and really work with the family on some of our unique learners. But again, I think they came out pretty strongly to say, if your child can't wear a mask, it's really not safe for them to be at school, and you should choose the remote option.
Will homework be minimized for remote learners to reduce the amount of time on screen? Gentlemen, do you want to take this one?
I think we have to look at that in general, not just for remote learners. I think, you know, we're recognizing that kids are on screen now, whether even in front of their kid or not, in front of the, teacher or not, for more than they would have been. So we want to look at that. I don't think in the middle school homework's ever been a major emphasis for the three of us anyway. But it is part of the learning process. There will be some homework. Whether we can build that into this, 8-hour day or the 6-hour day that already exists, we'll have to look at that more closely.
And I think just to add to that, in general, I think our teachers, part of what their professional learning and conversations that we're structuring now with them is all about what the impact is in terms of the instructional approach. So for the students who are in person versus the students who are streaming into a classroom versus the students who are full remote, if we were full remote, and we're really talking about, as we've said before, any remote learning, we want to have a structured time, but we also want to be cognizant of the fact that students are on screens and what we're asking them to do. So how teachers are structuring their individual lessons, what they're expecting students to do outside of the school day, the amount of screen time is a part of every conversation we have right now to try to ensure the best approach to respect the health and safety of students on screens, as well as give them breaks and make the learning meaningful. So I think it's a deeper question than just screen time, to Gordon's point. What is homework? Is it meaningful? Is it adding to the learning? And then what can be done off screen is a conversation we're having, because there is so much use of screens, especially coming off of distance learning. It's fresh in our brains. So that's the ongoing conversation.
Thanks, Tom.
We have time for one more question. Dr. Caraballo?
Oh, okay. Let's see. This looks like a good one, because I like it because it's going to really show people that we really care about having our kids in school. Why is GPS still proceeding with full return for middle schools when Governor Lamont recently gave school districts an option to choose hybrid models now? I understand that middle schools are designed to hold 3 grade levels in different areas, but it would still be safer to have less number of students in the building and more effective social distancing with less numbers of kids in the building. Please explain.
We have decided to go, full for K-8 for a number of reasons, but, and I think I did allude to this at the beginning. And, part of that is not only for the social emotional health of our young people that really want to be back in school, that's important. And all of the health professionals are saying that we are doing what we need to do, and that the health and safety percentage and where it needs to be warrants a full return. And so we are listening to the medical practitioners and those that are in this field. And I will say, it's hard for me as a superintendent to say, when it's time to close schools, I'm going to listen to all the medical professionals. Now, when it's time to open them, I'm going to ignore them. And I think that I really do have to be thoughtful about that. And the secondary instances that they said we need to consider, like cohorting and social distancing, again, we can meet what we've been asked to do. We couldn't meet that in the high school, and that's why, once we spent a lot of planning time, we made a decision that high school couldn't meet that. But we are very committed to our families and to our children and trying to get children back in school. So that's how I would answer that. And we're looking forward to September. And we all have to hop off this call, and several of us now are going to start the high school town hall. So we do archive these questions. We will go back through them. If there are some questions that haven't been asked before that are not in the Q&A, we have about a 500 question Q&A online. We will add those questions to it. And thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you again to our panelists. We appreciate you. Have a great night.
Night.